The secret's out. The jig is up. The cat is out of the bag. This guy, despite everything, won't be getting a shot. He won't be getting his promotion, one that he deserved, one that he earned. Yuki Tsunoda is not being promoted to the main Red Bull seat. Instead, it's being afforded to a dude who, with the greatest of respects, hasn't done diddly on paper to prove that he is more deserving of a chance to dance in a car that could help carry him to the promised land. And Yuki will have to remain where he is, in the mid-pack, foiled and forgotten, totally screwed over. Or has he? Back in 2021, if you want to remember that year, Sergio Perez was drafted into the Red Bull squad to help bolster that driving lineup after a stellar season of 2020. Initially, there were signs that perhaps this was the right call, but as each year passed and other teams drew closer and closer, Checo's results, or lack thereof, were starting to grain on the last nerve of everyone, with the exception of Papa Perez. From 2022 to 2023, Checo would occasionally lay down some stirring drives, winning on the streets of Monaco, for example, and earmarking himself as a title contender for next season. But when that next season showed up, he didn't. It wasn't too much of an issue over the last couple of years, as the Red Bull was so dominant that he could secure second in the championship anyway and mask the shortcomings that were definitely there. At the time, there was no reason for Red Bull to really worry too much. But in 2024, all you heard about all year was about how far behind Max Verstappen he was. And for that matter of fact, how far behind a lot of people he was. He struggled to get out of Q1 on a consistent basis. He was being out-qualified by cars that handled like mud, and despite a dominant first quarter of the year, Red Bull began to fall into the clutches of the other teams in the Constructors' Championship, partially because of the pace loss, but also primarily as a result of Checo's drownings. Nothing was going right for him that season. Even his powerboat team was mid, finishing at the bottom of the standings, while at the top was Tom Brady. Yeah, that Tom Brady. Probably deflated the hulls or something. Midway through the season, it was suggested that Red Bull might be looking at giving Checo the old heave-ho, but come Montreal, they issued him an extension on his contract. That was, what? This apparently was to help boost his confidence and rejuvenate his form, but there was also allegedly a performance clause attached to it. Whatever that clause was, short of turning up and driving, there wasn't a snowman's chance in hell of him meeting it. The rumor was to stay within 100 points of Max, but he wasn't even close. As each race went on, the situation just got worse and worse, until eventually it was surmised that his place in the Red Bull team was untenable. Rumors flew around as to who would replace him, and based on form, results, and the way that the successor system typically works within Red Bull, people had a pretty good idea of who should be given that shot. In the same year that Checo wormed his way into the Red Bull seat, Yuki Tsunoda had made his debut in Formula 1, driving for AlphaTauri. Or at least I think that's what they were called. They're still Minardi to me, goddammit. Early on in his tenure, things were kinda sketchy for this kid. His debut was alright, but the races after the fact were littered with mistakes to the extent that there were rumors that he'd be cast aside as early as the Dutch Grand Prix. Obviously, he survived. Spoiler alert. But his, shall we say, passionate way with words over the radio had people clutching at their pearls the world over. Oh, how I say, what a monster. Free piece of advice? If you're convinced that swearing means you shouldn't belong behind the wheel of a Formula 1 car, or even any race car for that matter, then there will be like half a dozen race drivers around the world left. Tops. If swearing ain't your thing, then this might not be the right sport for you. However, by the end of the year, Yuki had regressed as a driver, and this was best exemplified by finishing a fine 4th place in an AlphaTauri in the Grand Prix that shall not be named. From that point on, slowly but surely, Yuki had largely buried his demons, and to those paying attention, he had morphed into a more than solid contender by the year 2024. He had seen off internal threats from Nick de Vries and Daniel Ricciardo, both of whom exceptionally able drivers, whose last years in the game had smudged their achievements of years gone by. As the great intern of Jamaica said, this is not the same Yuki Tsunoda from 2021. In every way, he's improved upon himself, and we're seeing that in full effect nowadays, now proving to the world that he's worthy of a step up to better equipment. But of course, as we know by now, the dream didn't happen. They shunned him in lieu of Liam Lawson, a dude who had really just turned up to the gates and just got handed the keys to the kingdom, while Yuki had essentially been left hung out to dry. So, why this guy? After RB and the Honey Badger parted ways in Singapore, Lawson was thrown into the V-Carb seat for the remainder of 2024. There was a little bit of confusion around exactly what the seat was. Was it an audition? Was it a warm-up? Nobody really knew. There wasn't even any confirmation that he would be in Formula 1 at all for 2025. It didn't really register any amount of sense, but the real reason behind the murkiness was not what many of us expected. Eddie Jordan speculated that perhaps he was being looked at for the main Red Bull seat, and if EJ says something like that, you listen, because he's got too many contacts and too much experience within this paddock for that to be a lot of caca. Eventually it emerged that yes, Liam was indeed being looked at for that seat, and in all that noise, people were looking at Yuki and going, well, why not him? After all, Yuki had out-qualified Liam in every Grand Prix they contested throughout 2024 as teammates, and had finished ahead of him in most races and scored more points overall. By those metrics, Yuki had completely destroyed Liam. But this is where I come in with a counterpoint, right? So let's review the qualifying disparity. Time to bring out the maths. In the first qualifying event in Austin, Liam's time in Q1 was actually faster than that of Yuki's, but was commissioned to sacrifice his Q2 run in order to give Yuki a tow, so strike one. In Mexico, Liam was out-qualified again, but his time was barely 3/100ths of a second behind Yuki's, and was on course to improve on said time until a red flag was brought out at the end of Q2 thanks to, guess who? A good couple of outings. Time to sprinkle it with a couple of bad ones. At Interlagos, he was 3/10ths behind him in Q3, even if it did mean P5 overall, but it was Las Vegas that was particularly damaging. That weekend, Liam just plain sucked. If this weekend was the measure of which you had to determine if he would get a Red Bull seat, it wouldn't even earn him a drive in the Red Bull Downhill Soapbox Derby. In Qatar though, things did get a bit better for him, but not completely, as again he was out-qualified by Yuki by a few hundredths, and in the final round at Abu Dhabi, he again was only a few hundredths off. But there were sprint events. What about those? Well, in that first sprint, Liam was faster in the first part of qualifying before, again, becoming the sacrificial lamb in the second part. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but again, perspective. At Interlagos, Liam had actually out-qualified Yuki, getting into SQ3 while Yuki was out in SQ1, and he would do the exact same thing again in the final sprint in Qatar. And in those two sprints where Yuki got out-qualified, he was unable to reel Liam in when the sprint race came about. I'm not trying to chalk this up as if Liam was somehow better than Yuki in these 6 rounds, because he wasn't. What I am trying to do here is lend perspective. This idea that Yuki destroyed him is baloney, except for Vegas. Liam sucked eggs there. Of course, that was over a race distance as well, and in that respect, how did their races compare? Well, one could argue that Liam outshone Yuki in his return at Austin. Some would like to moan about the strategy calls and whatever, but him spinning at turn 1 mid-race wasn't exactly the fault of the pit wall now. Mexico wasn't a fair comparison since Yuki never made it beyond turn 1, but Interlagos was a fair comparison, and Yuki was just flat out better in race trim. The last 2 races were a mixed bag of fortunes. In Qatar, there wasn't much debate that Yuki was better than Liam over the course of the race, but in Abu Dhabi, that was a much more complicated story. Whether it was a clutch failure or brain failure, Yuki found himself going backwards off the line. He eventually wormed his way up the order a little bit, but Liam was doing a fine enough job on his own. He never fell into the clutches of Yuki like he might have done in other races gone by, and if anything, he was starting to ever so slightly go away a little bit. Liam was doing his part. It was just the crew that screwed him over before his brakes gave him a nice warm cup of piss off with a lap to go. Again, this is all a perspective thing to articulate the fact that Yuki in no way destroyed Liam, so that narrative does need to get gone, while at the same time, it needs to be acknowledged that just because Liam ran him close most of the time doesn't mean that he outperformed Yuki, because for the most part, Yuki was the better driver this season. So if performance was not the issue, what was? Well, Christian Horner's comments were rather telling. Despite not exactly being the paragon of truth-telling, he had this to say about the whole ordeal.
Well, Yuki has done 4 years, with our sister team, and he's a driver that's growing in experience and doing a good job. I think that what we felt in Liam, in what he's achieved in such a short space of time, the trajectory that he's on looks really promising, and that doesn't rule Yuki out for the future. It's just that at this juncture in time, we believe that Liam has got the right characteristics, the right strength of character to deal with the pressure that comes with being Max Verstappen's teammate.
Okay, now that's telling. In no uncertain terms, he's suggesting that despite the knowledge that Yuki is not the same loose cannon that he was in 2021, he's still not got the mental strength to cope with teaming up with the Flying Dutchman. Now, yes, partnering Max Verstappen or Arie Luyendyk for that matter is a whole different kettle of catfish, but is there any truth to this? It was revealed that Red Bull had set Yuki a target to calm down over the radio last season. It did seem disimproved as a whole, thanks in part to Ricciardo's mentorship, and if he were to not so much raise it, but control his emotions, then it can be a strong tool. Passion behind the wheel is a good thing, but it don't look like $1 million when you pull this sort of stuff after a session, and apparently that wasn't his first rodeo. What's more, it did seem he got a little bit flustered whenever a teammate of his got too close to his pace, even if that was kind of rare, and I can only think that instances like this are what led Red Bull to make the call, because performance-wise, it don't make a lick of sense. Although they did reckon that Liam had a higher ceiling than Yuki, and they regard him as being much more headstrong. Their words, not mine. Don't shoot the messenger. Yuki and Liam's contrasting opinions on whether a car should fit their driving style may have also played a part, or perhaps the Honda connections have something to do with it, as in Red Bull view Liam as more their guy, and Yuki as a Honda sympathy pick. But is that really what they think? I mean, what are they fearful of? That Yuki, thanks to his Honda connections, may leave at the end of 2025 and end up acting as a sort of Trojan horse for Aston Martin? Of course, that's all speculation, isn't it? If any of these Donnies catch wind of this video, they're gonna laugh themselves into a hernia. So, getting back to the crux of things, was this the right call? Well, I can't give you the right answer, can't I? Anything for Yuki would be called disingenuous. Anything against him would be seen as bias. You really want my take on this? Okay, in the long term, I think Liam is the better prospect. Shocker, I know. I think he has a higher ceiling based on his results under the circumstances and how he fared against Yuki as a teammate those 2 times in Junior Formula. I know F1 is a totally different game, but those were pretty much the only 2 times where things were on an even level. Sort of. Unless we forget how people were judging Yuki after his first 11 races as an F1 driver. Those opinions do not carry over today, and rightly so. Having said all of that, promoting Liam instead of Yuki here was not the right call. This is a professional sport. When it wants to be. In an ideal world, you get the best people to do the job. And if it so happens that they're not your favorite people, then that's just how it is. This is motor racing. This shit is less fair than life itself. But even if Liam was the better long-term prospect, at this moment, Yuki is the more complete driver. He's put in the miles. He's gotten the results. You know what he could do, and he's not the one you're gonna send into the lion's den. I mean, yeah, Yuki still does throw a fit if there's raisins in his biscuits, but this move has the potential to go seriously wrong and destroy careers here. Ultimately, what the right call should have been from the start would have been for Red Bull to just have some faith in their juniors, avoid signing Nick DeVries, and place Liam into the AlphaTauri seat alongside Yuki for 2 seasons, starting 2023. You then would have had 2 years of comparison as teammates to negate the need to take an absolute punt on someone who, while maybe having more potential, is a complete unknown quantity compared to a dude who had been there for 4 years and has morphed into a known quantity, one that had fended off world champions and living legends. In that respect, yes, Yuki Tsunoda was screwed over. He should have at least been afforded a shot at the seat. Even if the theory of him melting under max pressure would have come true, he deserved at least a chance to prove them wrong. Because in this sport, anything can happen. I mean, for example, 12 months ago, I had no faith in Isaac Hadjar, but whoa, Nelly, now I'm fucking myself over that issue. But now Yuki is not gonna get that shot, and the world is now throwing hate at Liam, and now we're mulling over who to blame here. Do we blame Horner? Do we blame Marco? Which would be stupid, considering how much of a Yuki fanboy he is. Do we blame Checo somehow? Or going back, do we blame all of this mess on his previous employer for dropping him when he didn't deserve to and placing him on the path to the Red Bull seat? Oh yes, it's all becoming abundantly clear.
Blame Canada! Blame Canada! It seems that everything's gone wrong since Canada came along.
But wait, back up a second here. We know how good Checo was that season. Don't forget how most people clamored for Red Bull to sign him up immediately. And yet he went to Red Bull and he drowned, replacing Alex Albon, who also drowned, replacing Pierre Gasly, who also drowned. All of them were or are acclaimed drivers, but were absolutely vilified and classified as useless when in that second Red Bull seat. Who's to say that won't continue to happen? Does anyone truly want that thing? It's a complete poison chalice. And just to clarify here, that is in no way to justify the decisions made. It's just that anything can happen. For all we know, 6 months in, Liam could be told to vamoose and Yuki could get the golden ticket. Or if not that, the Honda connections could see him moving to their new home at Aston Martin for 2026, where he would have Adrian Newey at his disposal at a well-funded team with pretty much all the resources needed to win the World Championship, and would serve as a good replacement for the outgoing Fernando Alonso. Yeah, you heard me, Alonso, because holy nepotism, Batman.